So, for those who have joined us very recently, I've been going through the perhaps long and arduous process of going through the book of Revelation, and so we're almost halfway through, which means that there may be some catching up to do. But up until now, we've been through seals, we've been through trumpets, we've been through warnings and congratulations to 7 different churches in Asia Minor. And now the scene shifts to more visions, more revelations that Jesus has provided for John. And so we're at the point where we've had 6 of the 7 trumpets. We're waiting for the 7th to begin. And then we get a curve thrown at us. And so we'll start working on... There we go. Now I use the King James Version for the slides here, primarily because it's public property. Nobody's going to come down for copyright violations. King James and his crew are long past, so it's all good. But I probably will not read it exactly the way that it's written up there, mostly because I speak English, and some of that language is a little archaic. So, I saw another mighty angel come down from heaven, clothed with a cloud, and a rainbow was on his head. And his face was as it were the sun, and his feet as pillars of fire. This actually resembles a vision that the prophet Ezekiel saw. And he had in his hand a little book open, and he set his right foot on the sea and his left foot on the earth, and cried with a loud voice as when a lion roars. And when he had cried, 7 thunders uttered their voices. And when the 7 thunders had uttered their voices, I was about to write, and I heard a voice from heaven saying to me, seal up those things which the 7 thunders uttered, and don't write them. So, even though Jesus had told him, write down what you see, he doesn't get to write down quite everything that he sees and hears. There are some things that we are not meant to know, apparently, even though he got to hear it. So, apparently Job didn't know that he was being tested. He didn't know that Satan was challenging God to make life basically a living hell for him, and that God trusted that Job would get through it just fine. Verse 5, and the angel which I saw stand on the sea and on the earth lifted up his hand to heaven and swore by him that lives forever and ever, who created heaven and the things in it, and the earth and all things that are in it, and the sea and all things that are in it, that there should be no more delay. So now we're getting to the crux. There's not going to be any delay. But in the days of the voice of the 7th angel, when he shall begin to sound, the mystery of God should be finished, as he has declared to his servants the prophets. So the 7th trumpet begins the end, as it were, of the hiding of the messages of the prophets. And the voice which I heard from heaven spoke to me again, and said, go, take the little book which is open in the hand of the angel which stands on the sea, who stands on the sea and upon the earth. I went to the angel and said to him, give me the little book. And you can just imagine, apparently this angel is huge, and he has to walk up to this angel and say, give me the book. And he said to me, take it and eat it, and it will make your belly bitter, but it will be in your mouth sweet as honey. And again, this is almost right out of the book of Ezekiel. He's handed a book. He has to eat the book. It's as sweet as honey in his mouth. Then we don't find out really much what happens after that in Ezekiel, but here it turns out to turn sour in his stomach. And so why is it sour in his stomach? Well, I took the the little book out of the angel's hand, ate it up, and in my mouth it was sweet as honey, but as soon as I'd eaten it, my belly was bitter. So why is it bitter? It's digesting. Maybe bad ink. Maybe paper doesn't digest very well. Well, a lot of what goes on in Revelation has ties to the book of Daniel. And so Daniel's response to some of the visions that he's given kind of gives you an idea of what's going on here. So in Daniel 7, verse 15, he says, I was grieved in my spirit in the midst of my body. So about here, here. And the visions of my head troubled me. And then to verse 28, here is the end of the matter. As for me, Daniel, my cogitations troubled me, and my countenance changed, but I kept the matter in my heart. So in other words, he's feeling kind of ill. He's not feeling well. This is very disturbing stuff. And so he's getting, John is getting reactions similar to Daniel as he's digesting the truth that's been given to him in this book. Now remember, Jesus had a book in his hand, and he was breaking open seals. And you get the impression that there's a chain of custody here. So God the Father gives Jesus the book. Jesus gives a book to the angel gives the book to John, and then John has to digest it, and then we find out what he's expected to do with this. So the question for us is, do we really want to know what's going to happen in the future, right? Especially if you find out that evil and horrendous things are going to happen. They'll proliferate before the arrival of Jesus. What if we knew how much bloodshed there was going to be among fellow believers? Or friends and neighbors who are not believers. We love them dearly. What if we knew that our brothers and sisters of the faith would suffer greatly before Jesus returns? I think John is having to process all of this as he's learning what's going on in this book. And he, the angel, said to me, you must prophesy again before many peoples and nations and tongues and kings. So maybe it's God's way of saying, oh, by the way, just because we're about to blow the seventh trumpet doesn't mean their job is done. There's more to this. So now we're in chapter 11. And there was given me a reed like a rod, and the angel stood saying, rise and measure the temple of God and the altar and those that worship therein. Now, how do you measure worshipers? Okay, you can measure a temple, you can measure an altar, but how do you measure worshipers? But the court that is outside the temple leave out, and do not measure it, for it is given to the Gentiles. And the holy city shall they tread underfoot 42 months. So here we have numbers that come up. 42 months, 3.5 years, 1,260 days. These numbers just will keep flowing like a river all the way through the rest of the book here. And it's not easy to understand exactly what these numbers are referencing here. So by the time of the reign of Emperor Domitian of the Roman Empire, the temple had already been destroyed. So how are you going to measure the temple? What temple is John supposed to measure? And what are the measurements? So if you look toward the end of the book of Ezekiel, chapters 40 on, you'll find measurements of the courtyard, you'll find measurements of the wall, you'll find measurements of the temple, you'll find measurements of the inner sanctum. You will find all kinds of actual written down, this is so many cubits, this is so many. But you don't get any of that here. What do you get instead? And I will give power to my 2 witnesses. This is the very next verse. It tells them to measure the temple, measure the worshipers. And then we start talking about 2 witnesses. And they shall prophesy 1,203 days, or 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. These are the 2 olive trees and the 2 candlesticks standing before the God of the earth. What is going on here? Like, really, what is going on here? So, why does this story of 2 witnesses begin immediately after John is told to measure the temple and measure the worshippers? Is the measure of the church its witness? I suspect that's what's going on here, because you're talking immediately about witnesses as soon as he's told to measure the temple. So, who are these 2 witnesses? And why 2? So you remember the story of the 3 strangers who come to meet Abraham? One of them eventually is identified as God, and there are 2 angels with him. What are they sent to do? Well, they're sent to go spy out what's going on in Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities of the plain. Their job is to bring a report to God about the evil that's going on and whether God should destroy these cities. God always follows his own law. He says that out of the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses shall a thing be established. And something like that is going on here. So these 2 witnesses are there to speak out about Jesus Christ, about God's will, and to try to convict people of sin so they'll turn to God. Now, I don't know if they're 2 literal witnesses, okay? It's probably symbolic of the witness of the church. And if you watch the news, you'll see that there seem to be a couple of different ways that the church approaches the people of the territories that they're in. The church in Israel tends to be quite Jewish now. They're Messianic Jews. They work differently among Jews than churches outside of Israel work among Gentiles. So maybe there's a Jewish and Gentile kind of convergence happening here. Again, just an idea. So, well, what are these olive trees and candlesticks all about? It's a reference to a prophecy in Jeremiah chapter 4, verses 12 to 14. And it goes, "And I answered again and said to him, what are these 2 olive branches that send golden oil out of themselves?" These 2 branches through pipes, sending oil through pipes. And he answered me and said, "Do you not know what these are?" I said, "No, my Lord." He said, "These are the 2 anointed ones that stand by the Lord of the whole earth." So what are anointed ones? Well, Jesus' title, Christ, is based on the word anointed. So in the Bible, you have 3 kinds of people, 3 kinds of positions that require somebody to be anointed. Priests, rarely prophets. I think Samuel is the only example of a prophet who was anointed, literally, and kings. So for sure, kings and priests were anointed to get their job, as it were. But these don't seem to be priests. These don't seem to be kings, and these witnesses don't seem to be priests. So my money would be on prophets. They're probably prophets. If there are 2 literal people, they're prophets. But if they're symbolic of the church's witness, we're all called to be prophets. Anybody who speaks the gospel is a prophet. And if any man would hurt them, fire proceeds out of their mouth and devours their enemies. And if any man would hurt them, he must in this manner be killed. Does that sound like anybody we know in the Old Testament? Sounds a lot like Elijah when King Ahab sends troops to come fetch him. He says, if I'm a servant of the Lord, may fire come down and devour you and your troops. If I were the second guy, if I were the second troop leader, I might be a little more circumspect, but apparently he was not wise enough. Leader number 3 begged for mercy, and God allowed him to safely conduct this man to Ahab. So this looks kind of like Elijah the prophet. These have the power to shut heaven so that rain not in the days of their prophecy, and have power over waters to turn them to blood, and to smite the earth with all plagues as often as they will. So the first part of that, again, seems to be very Elijah-like. Shutting heaven, like Elijah prayed, and for 3 years it didn't rain. But the next part of it seems to remind us about somebody else. It reminds us about a guy named Moses. About water to blood and plagues. Yeah, that sounds like a Moses kind of thing. Now, a lot of people have thought, well, it's exactly those 2 prophets who appear in the Transfiguration. So maybe these guys come back to earth and start working miracles. They never did find the body of Moses, and Elijah was taken up to heaven in a whirlwind. I'm not sure that that's what's going on here, but whoever this is, however this is, it resembles the work of these 2 prophets. Okay, so, and when they have finished their testimony, the beast that ascends out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them, and shall overcome them and kill them. If you apply for this job, you might want to consider the end that happens here. You know that you're going to be killed at the end, probably violently. I would think it seems kind of violent when it talks about making war against them. That seems a little violent. And the dead body shall lie in the street of the great city, which is spiritually called Sodom and Egypt, where our Lord was crucified. So, pop quiz. What city is being referred to here?
Jerusalem.
Jerusalem, yeah. Sodom and Gomorrah, or Sodom and Egypt. Jerusalem. So, have we seen who the beast that ascends out of the abyss is yet in the book? No, we haven't. That's going to come a little bit later. But what's the likely meaning of make war against them? Well, it probably means that it's going to be a very violent end. Almost sounds like there will be some resistance on their part, but they will be overcome. Perhaps, I'm not sure. The name of the great city, Jerusalem. So, if he's calling that, if he says that about Jerusalem, what is God's spiritual assessment of that great city? Obviously, he's not impressed with Jerusalem. He's calling Jerusalem Sodom and Egypt. Okay? This might be something to keep in mind as we look at events going on in Israel. Must we have complete unconditional support for a country that is assessed that way by God? That's only a question, okay? It's something to think about. But in the Bible, in the history of the Bible, do Jerusalem's leaders usually follow and obey whatever God decrees? Not usually, huh? Very stubborn and rebellious as a general rule. And what might that imply about Jerusalem's likely current spiritual state? Just asking the question. Okay, now, about making war on the witnesses. Daniel 7:23 talks about a time when there is a war made against the people of God. So this is an angel speaking to him, to Daniel. Thus he said, the 4th beast shall be the 4th kingdom upon the earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down and break it in pieces. And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall arise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue 3 kings. And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change the times of the laws, and they shall be given into his hand until a time and times and the dividing of time. But the judgment shall sit, and they shall take away his dominion, to consume and to destroy it to the end. So, isn't that kind of a similar scenario going on here? There's a time when whoever is in charge of this kingdom will turn against all of the people of God, whether the spiritual or the physical people of God. And the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. Okay, so Daniel has jumped ahead to chapter 20 in Revelation. So back to Revelation 11. And they of the people and kindreds and tongues and nations shall see their dead bodies 3 days and a half, and shall not allow their dead bodies to be put in graves. And those that dwell on the earth shall rejoice over them and make merry and send gifts to one another, because these 2 prophets tormented them that dwell on the earth. So this is, if you want to call it, the neo-pagan Christmas celebration over the death of these two witnesses. So, what's the significance of leaving the bodies out in the street and not burying them in the Bible? I'll give you a reference in Isaiah 66:24. They shall go forth and look upon the carcasses of the men that have transgressed against me, that's against God, for their worm shall not die, and neither shall their fire be quenched, and they shall be as an abhorring unto all flesh. This is a mark of extreme disrespect, a mark of extreme contempt, to not even bother burying them. And just in case you're wondering about the context of this Isaiah 66 passage, there's a big battle. For behold, the Lord will come with fire, and with his chariots like a whirlwind, to render his anger with fury, and his rebuke with flames of fire. For by fire and by his sword the Lord will plead with all flesh, and the slain of the Lord shall be many. So he's talking about an actual war. He's talking about corpses spread all over the place, not buried. Okay, so we're not talking about eternal punishment in that passage. We're talking about God's contempt on those who have contempt for his people. All right, so in the Old Testament, the grave was actually considered a place of rest, and especially if you're buried with your fathers. King David was buried with his fathers. So for the body to be left unburied is the ultimate act of contempt. And so that contempt, God is going to shower back on those who have contempt for his people. And the story's not over them. They're dead. But after 3.5 days, the Spirit of life from God entered into them, and they stood upon their feet, and great fear fell upon those who saw them. So notice a couple of things. A lot of people are seeing them come back to life. If this is a literal story, and I have no reason to believe otherwise, because we're not told it's a vision. Actually, we're told it's a description that an angel is giving to John. They stood upon their feet, and great fear fell upon those who saw them. And they heard a great voice from heaven saying to them, "Come up here." And they ascended up to heaven in a cloud, and their enemies beheld them. So, people are seeing this, and they're seeing a resurrection, and they're seeing an ascension. What does that sound like? If you are a 21st century evangelical Christian, what does that sound like?
Rapture.
It sounds like rapture, right? But it happens after a lot of witnessing. It happens after a death. If that is literal, if this is a literal description of what's going on, as soon as these two witnesses, if you've identified them, die, how many days is it until the rapture? Again, something that we should actually ask ourselves as we're reading the text. In the same hour there's a great earthquake, and a tenth part of the city fell, and in the earthquake were slain of men 7,000, and the remnant were frightened and gave glory to the God of heaven. So why are they afraid? And why do they give glory to the God of heaven? Are they seeing the Son of Man, described in Matthew 24 verse 30? I suspect so. This seems like the story is coming to a climax. And then the next verse says, the second woe is past, and behold, the third woe comes quickly. So does verse 14 suggest that the resurrection of the witnesses, and presumably everyone else, corresponds with the end of the second woe? Perhaps. And the seventh angel sounded, and there were great voices in heaven saying, the kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. So the third woe is an announcement that Jesus has come to rule, that he has actually started to reign. And the 24 elders who sat before God on their seats fell upon their faces and worshipped God, saying, we give thanks, O Lord, God Almighty, who are and were and are to come, because you have taken to yourself your great power and have reigned. So it's a woe, right? Do these heavenly elders seem to sound like it's a woe? Are they seeing it as a woe? Probably not. They're praising God for it. The heavenly host considers it worship-worthy good news. It's only a woe for those who oppose Jesus. And here we have, the nations were angry, and your wrath has come, and the time of the dead, that they should be judged, and that you should give reward to your servants, the prophets, and to the saints, and to them that fear your name, small and great, and should destroy them which destroy the earth. So this is part of the announcement. The rest of the book is going to talk about how these things come to pass. What we have is just the preliminary announcement. And the temple of God was opened in heaven, and in his temple was seen the ark of his testament. And there were lightnings and voices and thunderings and an earthquake and great hail. So now even the people on earth are seeing God's temple open in heaven. So it suggests that there's a wall between heaven and earth that is breached. At least enough that they can see what's going on. They might not be able to cross over, but they can see what they're missing. And the thing about seeing is the Ark of the Testimony in that temple is a reminder that God has made promises and that he's keeping these promises. He records what he promised. In ancient Israel, when God had Moses set up the tabernacle, he gave him 2 tablets of stone, right? And we think of them as, 5 commandments on one tablet and 5 commandments on the other in 360-point type. But no, that's not what's going on there. There were 2 copies of the covenant, which consisted of 3 chapters. Chapters 20, 21, 22. And if I remember correctly, 23 is the ratification of that covenant. Those those chapters were written on the two sides of each tablet. Why? Because one copy was for the people of Israel and one was God's copy. That's how those things worked back then. The sovereign king, the overlord king, had his copy, and the sub-king, eventually David, has his copy. But he keeps a record of his covenants. And when he displays the Ark of the Covenant, he is showing, I am keeping my promises. And that's happened right now. He always keeps his promises, and he always remembers his promises, even when we don't. So, according to this narrative, the time has come to fully enact all of the clauses of the promises. This includes destroying those who destroy the earth, it includes judging the dead, it includes rewarding his servants. So, the next time, we'll be studying the next two chapters. Just for the fun of it, I'm calling it Beauty and the Beasts, because there is basically a princess who gives birth to a child who will rule the nation with a rod of iron. And of course, there's going to be a dragon and beasts. So, Beauty and the Beasts, and the dragon too. Just a passing thought here. You have an evil city. You have a wall being torn down. You have 7 trumpets. You have 7, after 7 seals, you have 7 trumpets. The 7 trumpets are within the 7th seal. All of these 7s, do they remind you of another story in the Old Testament? 7s with trumpets? Jericho, yeah. Jericho. God makes the Israelites walk around blowing trumpets once a day for 6 days. On the 7th day, they walk around 7 times blowing their trumpets. And then there's a final big trumpet blast and a big shout, and the walls come down. We'll be seeing parts of that pattern in the time, not this time, but the time after, as we continue on through the book of Revelation. I just wanted to kind of put that little signpost up there, that there are going to be elements of the story of Jericho wound into this, and yet would actually help us see our role in this coming time, whether soon or later. So I hope this helps more than it confuses the issue. And we can now get back to regular programming.